A group of small, fast boats moving quickly toward a heavily armed warship may appear insignificant at first glance. The size difference alone is striking. A modern U.S. Navy destroyer weighs nearly 10,000 tons and carries advanced radar systems, missiles, helicopters, and layered defenses. The approaching boats are often less than 20 meters long, lightly built, and powered by high-speed engines. Yet when those boats close distance with a destroyer in the Persian Gulf, naval crews immediately shift into a higher level of alert. The reason is simple. In modern naval warfare, size does not determine danger. Speed, proximity, and intent matter far more. The encounter described in the title follows a pattern that has appeared repeatedly in the narrow waters of the Persian Gulf. Iranian fast attack boats move toward a U.S. naval vessel, sometimes approaching within a few hundred meters. Radio warnings are issued. Helicopters may launch. Defensive systems are prepared. The situation can unfold within minutes. To understand why such encounters trigger immediate reactions, it helps to first examine the environment in which they occur. The Persian Gulf is not open ocean. It is a confined body of water bordered by several countries and connected to the outside world through the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage through which a significant share of global oil exports moves each day. At its narrowest point, the strait is roughly 33 kilometers wide. The designated shipping lanes used by tankers are far smaller. Within this space, military vessels, commercial tankers, fishing boats, patrol craft, and coastal traffic all operate at the same time. This density creates a constant flow of close encounters. A U.S. Navy destroyer operating in the region is usually performing one of several missions. It may be escorting commercial shipping, conducting surveillance, participating in coalition patrols, or supporting broader regional deterrence operations. These ships are equipped with advanced sensors capable of tracking aircraft, missiles, and surface vessels across large distances. But radar and sensors alone cannot eliminate uncertainty. When a small craft approaches at high speed, the ship's crew must quickly determine what the approaching vessel intends to do. In naval operations, this process is called intent assessment. Intent assessment involves analyzing several factors at the same time: speed, direction, communication signals, distance, and behavior patterns. A fishing boat passing nearby behaves very differently from a craft moving directly toward a warship while ignoring radio warnings. The challenge is that fast boats can close distance extremely quickly. A small vessel traveling at 40 knots can cover more than 1 kilometer in less than a minute. In a confined waterway like the Persian Gulf, that speed drastically reduces reaction time. If a vessel approaching at high speed carries explosives or weapons, the difference between a safe distance and a dangerous distance can shrink rapidly. Naval commanders therefore treat rapid approaches as potential threats until proven otherwise. This does not mean every encounter is hostile. Many interactions between naval forces and local craft end without incident, but the margin for error in these waters is extremely small. Because of that, destroyers operating in the region follow strict procedures when unidentified boats approach too closely. Warnings are issued. Defensive systems track the craft. Helicopters or surveillance drones may observe the movement. The goal is not escalation. The goal is to maintain enough reaction time to prevent a surprise attack. Understanding why small boats play such a central role in these encounters requires looking beyond the individual incident and examining the broader naval strategy that produced them. The boats themselves are not random actors on the water. They are part of a deliberate military system. That system is known as swarm naval strategy. The small boats approaching large warships in the Persian Gulf are not simply patrol craft operating independently. They are part of a naval doctrine designed to exploit the geography of the region and the economics of modern naval warfare. This doctrine is often described as swarm strategy. Swarm tactics involve deploying many small, fast vessels that can move quickly and unpredictably around a much larger ship. Instead of confronting a destroyer with another large warship, the strategy attempts to overwhelm the defenses of a high-value target using numbers, speed, and short reaction times. The concept developed gradually as Iran assessed the balance of naval power in the region. The United States Navy operates some of the most advanced warships in the world. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, for example, carry the Aegis Combat System, a sophisticated radar and command network capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously. These ships can intercept aircraft, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles using guided weapons. Directly matching that technological capability with conventional fleets would be extremely expensive. Building destroyers, aircraft carriers, and advanced submarines requires enormous industrial capacity and decades of investment. Instead of trying to replicate that structure, Iranian naval planners focused on a different approach. They examined how smaller, cheaper platforms could challenge larger ships in narrow waterways. This approach is often called asymmetric naval warfare. Asymmetric warfare occurs when a weaker military force avoids direct confrontation with a stronger opponent and instead develops methods that exploit vulnerabilities. In the maritime domain, small boats are one of the most effective tools for this strategy. A fast attack craft can cost a fraction of a modern destroyer. It requires fewer personnel, less maintenance infrastructure, and can operate from small coastal bases or hidden coves along the shoreline. Iran has built a large inventory of these vessels over the past several decades. Many of them are operated by the naval branch of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, often abbreviated as IRGCN. These boats vary in size and capability. Some carry machine guns or rockets. Others are equipped with anti-ship missiles designed to strike larger vessels from a distance. A few are designed for high-speed maneuvering and may carry explosive payloads. The effectiveness of the system does not rely on a single boat. It relies on numbers and coordination. Imagine a destroyer moving through a narrow shipping lane, while several small craft approach from multiple directions. Even if each individual boat poses only a limited threat, the combined movement forces the destroyer to monitor several targets simultaneously. This situation creates what naval analysts call defensive saturation. Defensive saturation occurs when a defensive system must track and respond to multiple threats at the same time. Even highly advanced sensors and weapons can face challenges if several targets approach rapidly from different angles. Swarm tactics attempt to generate exactly that situation. Speed plays a crucial role in the concept. Many of these small craft can reach speeds exceeding 40 knots, which is roughly 74 kilometers per hour on the water. That speed allows them to close distance rapidly before a larger vessel can reposition or disengage. The geography of the Persian Gulf amplifies the effectiveness of this approach. The coastline along the northern side of the Gulf contains numerous small harbors, islands, and inlets. These features allow small boats to disperse, hide, and launch quickly. From these positions, they can reach major shipping lanes within a relatively short time. This environment differs dramatically from open ocean naval warfare. In the open sea, large ships benefit from distance and maneuvering space. Sensors can detect threats from far away, and warships have more time to respond. In the Persian Gulf, distances are compressed. Commercial tankers, fishing vessels, and naval ships operate in close proximity. Radar screens often display dozens of contacts at once. Distinguishing routine traffic from potential threats requires constant monitoring. For the Iranian naval strategy, this environment offers several advantages. Small boats can blend into regular maritime activity. Their movements may appear similar to those of local fishing vessels until they begin to approach more aggressively. This ambiguity forces foreign naval vessels to evaluate each situation carefully. The system also serves a strategic signaling function. By deploying fast boats near foreign warships, Iran demonstrates that it can monitor naval activity inside the Gulf and respond quickly. The presence of these vessels reinforces the message that the coastal state maintains influence over nearby waters. Such encounters rarely escalate into direct conflict. Instead, they function as controlled demonstrations of capability. Still, the possibility of miscalculation remains. When vessels approach at high speed and communication is limited, the window for decision-making can shrink quickly. For the crews aboard a destroyer, the key challenge becomes clear. They must determine intent and respond before a small craft closes the distance where defensive options become limited. Understanding how that response unfolds requires examining the operational procedures that guide U.S. Navy warships during these encounters. When fast boats begin moving toward a U.S. destroyer, the ship does not wait to see what happens next. The response begins almost immediately, and it follows a sequence of procedures designed to preserve distance and maintain control of the situation. This reaction is driven by one fundamental constraint: time. A destroyer is a powerful vessel, but it is also a large one. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer is about 155 meters long and weighs thousands of tons. Turning, accelerating, or repositioning a ship of that size takes time and space. Small boats operate very differently. A light craft powered by high-performance engines can accelerate quickly and change direction almost instantly. If that boat is already close to a destroyer, the window for defensive action can shrink to a matter of seconds. For that reason, U.S. Navy ships operate under strict force protection procedures whenever unidentified vessels approach within certain distances. The first step usually begins with detection. Destroyers use a combination of radar systems, electro-optical sensors, and visual observation from watch crews stationed on the bridge and around the ship. Radar detects surface contacts at long distances, while optical systems and binocular observation help confirm the type of vessel approaching. Once a craft begins moving toward the ship in a direct path, the crew starts evaluating behavior patterns. Is the boat crossing the ship's path and continuing on its way? Or is it adjusting its course to close distance? A vessel that repeatedly adjusts course to move toward the destroyer draws immediate attention. At this point, the ship typically begins communication warnings. The crew will attempt to contact the approaching craft using maritime radio channels. The message is direct and standardized. The vessel is instructed to change course and maintain distance from the warship. If the boat continues closing the distance after radio warnings, the response escalates in visible steps. Naval doctrine often describes this as a graduated response, meaning each action signals increasing seriousness while still allowing the approaching vessel time to disengage. The destroyer may activate loudspeaker warnings or signal lights. Crew members may position themselves with visible defensive equipment. These actions serve two purposes at once. They warn the approaching vessel that it is entering a restricted zone, and they demonstrate that the destroyer is aware of the situation. Awareness matters because surprise attacks at sea often rely on closing distance before the target realizes what is happening. If the situation continues to escalate, the destroyer may deploy additional assets. One of the most common is the ship's helicopter. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers often carry MH-60 Seahawk helicopters, which can launch quickly and observe approaching vessels from the air. From above, the helicopter crew can monitor movements, record video, and sometimes communicate with the boats directly. This aerial perspective dramatically improves situational awareness. The helicopter can track multiple vessels at once and relay information back to the destroyer's command team. At the same time, the destroyer's defensive systems begin preparing for worst-case scenarios. Modern warships contain several layers of protection designed to stop threats at different distances. Some systems detect incoming missiles or aircraft at long range. Others defend against closer threats, such as small boats. One of the most visible systems is the Close-In Weapon System, often abbreviated as CIWS. This automated gun system is designed to intercept incoming threats at very short distances using a rapid-fire cannon guided by radar. Although CIWS is primarily associated with missile defense, it can also engage small surface targets if necessary. Destroyers also carry crew-served weapons and medium-caliber naval guns capable of targeting smaller vessels. Yet the goal of these preparations is not immediate combat. The primary objective is deterrence. Deterrence means convincing a potential attacker that continuing the approach will not succeed. By showing readiness and awareness early, the destroyer increases the chances that the approaching boats will alter course before reaching a dangerous distance. Distance itself is the most valuable defensive resource in naval encounters. If a potential threat remains several kilometers away, the destroyer has time to evaluate the situation and select the appropriate response. If the same vessel closes to a few hundred meters, the number of available options becomes much smaller. This is why reaction speed is essential. Naval crews train extensively to recognize patterns of approach and respond before the situation becomes compressed. Exercises simulate scenarios where multiple small craft appear suddenly on radar and begin closing distance. In these drills, seconds matter. A delayed response can allow a vessel to move from a monitored contact to a close-range threat before warnings or deterrence measures take effect. Because of that reality, encounters with fast boats rarely unfold slowly. The sequence of detection, communication, warning, and defensive readiness often occurs within minutes. From the outside, it may appear that the Navy is reacting aggressively to relatively small craft. From the perspective of the crew aboard the destroyer, the response is a necessary part of operating inside one of the most strategically sensitive waterways on Earth. Understanding why these encounters happen so frequently requires examining the geography that places opposing naval forces in such close proximity. To understand why encounters between fast boats and destroyers happen repeatedly in this region, it is necessary to look beyond the individual vessels and examine the geography that surrounds them. The Persian Gulf is one of the most strategically important bodies of water in the world. Its significance does not come from its size. Compared with many oceans and seas, the Gulf is relatively small. Its importance comes from what moves through it. Large volumes of the world's oil exports pass through the Gulf every day. These shipments leave ports in countries such as Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates before heading toward global energy markets. Most of those tankers must travel through a narrow maritime passage at the eastern end of the Gulf. That passage is the Strait of Hormuz. A maritime choke point is a narrow route through which large volumes of trade must pass. Because ships have limited alternative paths, control or disruption of that route can affect global supply chains. The Strait of Hormuz is widely considered one of the most critical choke points in the global energy system. At its narrowest navigational corridor, the shipping lanes through the strait are only a few kilometers wide in each direction. This creates a dense maritime environment where many types of vessels operate close together. Tankers carrying millions of barrels of oil move through the lanes while patrol boats, fishing vessels, cargo ships, and naval forces share the same waters. For naval commanders, this congestion creates constant operational complexity. Sensors may detect dozens of contacts at once. Each radar return must be identified and tracked. Some vessels will follow predictable routes along shipping lanes. Others may maneuver more freely along coastlines or around nearby islands. The northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz belongs to Iran. Along this coast are numerous small ports, inlets, and islands that extend into the Gulf. These features provide natural positions from which small boats can quickly reach nearby shipping routes. From a strategic perspective, this geography creates a layered environment. On one side of the waterway are international shipping lanes carrying energy supplies to global markets. On the other side are coastal bases from which small vessels can launch patrols or demonstrations of presence. Because the distances are short, the time required for a boat to reach these shipping lanes can be minimal. This environment also explains why major naval powers maintain a continuous presence in the region. The United States Navy operates within the Gulf as part of broader security arrangements intended to ensure that international shipping can pass through the Strait of Hormuz without interference. Naval patrols, escorts, and surveillance operations are routine. These deployments serve multiple purposes. They monitor maritime activity, they reassure commercial shipping companies, and they signal that disruptions to global energy routes would face immediate response. But the same geography that makes naval patrols necessary also increases the likelihood of close encounters. When multiple navies operate in a confined waterway, their patrol routes inevitably intersect. Commercial shipping adds another layer of complexity. Tankers must follow designated lanes to avoid collisions, which concentrates traffic into predictable corridors. Naval ships often position themselves near these routes to monitor activity. Small boats moving from nearby coastlines toward those same corridors may therefore cross paths with foreign naval vessels. The result is a maritime environment where proximity is normal. Encounters that would be rare in open ocean conditions occur regularly in the Persian Gulf. Strategists often describe this region as a contact zone, meaning an area where different military forces operate close enough to observe and interact with one another frequently. Within such zones, demonstrations of presence are common. A patrol boat approaching a destroyer may be observing its movements, signaling coastal awareness, or testing response patterns. The destroyer, in turn, monitors the approach and responds with warning procedures to maintain distance. Neither side necessarily intends to trigger conflict, but both sides use these encounters to reinforce their position inside the strategic environment. Because the Strait of Hormuz sits at the center of the global energy system, even small incidents in these waters attract international attention. A brief interaction between patrol boats and a warship can quickly become global news. Yet the encounter itself is only one small part of a larger system. That system involves deterrence, signaling, and the continuous management of risk inside a narrow maritime corridor that connects global energy supply to international markets. To understand the real meaning of these encounters, it is necessary to examine what they signal beyond the immediate moment on the water. When fast boats approach a destroyer in the Persian Gulf, the event often appears dramatic in headlines. Small craft closing distance with a heavily armed warship creates a striking image. Yet in strategic terms, these encounters are rarely about immediate combat. They are about signaling. Naval signaling is a form of communication between states that occurs through military movement rather than diplomatic language. Ships maneuver, aircraft patrol, and surveillance systems activate in ways that convey information about capability, readiness, and intent. The Persian Gulf has become one of the most active signaling environments in the world. Each patrol, escort mission, or close encounter contributes to an ongoing exchange of signals between regional forces and outside navies operating in the area. When Iranian fast boats approach a foreign warship, several messages may be conveyed simultaneously. First, the movement demonstrates coastal awareness. By appearing near a destroyer, the boats signal that local forces are monitoring naval activity in nearby waters. This shows that ships operating inside the Gulf are not moving unnoticed. Second, the approach reinforces the concept of local presence. Coastal states often emphasize that they maintain influence over waters near their shoreline. Deploying patrol boats near foreign vessels reminds observers that the region is not an empty operating space, but an area with active local forces. Third, such encounters allow military planners to observe reactions. When a destroyer issues warnings, launches a helicopter, or alters course, those actions reveal operational procedures. Over time, repeated encounters allow analysts to understand patterns of response. This type of observation is common in military competition. States study how opposing forces behave in real situations, especially in environments where open conflict is not occurring. From the perspective of the U.S. Navy, the signaling process works in the opposite direction as well. By reacting quickly and visibly, a destroyer communicates that it maintains control of the situation. Warning procedures, defensive readiness, and aerial surveillance all reinforce the message that the ship is prepared to defend itself and the surrounding maritime traffic. This dynamic forms the basis of deterrence at sea. Deterrence does not rely on constant combat. Instead, it depends on convincing potential adversaries that aggressive action would fail or trigger a response that outweighs any possible gain. Visible readiness is central to that process. A destroyer, equipped with layered sensors, helicopters, and defensive weapons, presents a clear picture of capability. Even small actions, such as launching a helicopter or activating warning systems, can communicate that the vessel is alert and prepared. These demonstrations reduce the chances that a probing maneuver will escalate into something more dangerous. Still, the system carries risks. Close encounters between military forces always involve the possibility of misinterpretation. A maneuver intended as observation might appear threatening. A warning intended as routine procedure could be misunderstood as escalation. Because distances in the Persian Gulf are so short, the time available to clarify intentions can be limited. That is why naval forces operating in the region rely heavily on established procedures and communication channels. Radio warnings, visual signals, and standardized responses provide structure during encounters that might otherwise become chaotic. Over decades of repeated interaction, these procedures have formed an informal pattern of behavior. Fast boats approach. Warnings are issued. The boats alter course and move away. The encounter ends. Each side observes the other, and the broader system continues operating. From a distance, the interaction may appear tense. In reality, it often functions as a controlled exchange within a highly monitored environment. This does not eliminate the possibility of crisis. History shows that maritime incidents can escalate if signals are misread or if one side attempts to push the boundaries of acceptable distance too far. Yet most encounters follow the same pattern because both sides understand the strategic consequences of escalation in such a critical waterway. The Strait of Hormuz connects the energy resources of the Persian Gulf to global markets. Disruption of that route would affect economies far beyond the region itself. For that reason, naval forces operating in these waters manage a delicate balance. They demonstrate presence. They observe each other's movements. They respond quickly to potential threats, but they also maintain enough restraint to prevent routine encounters from turning into open conflict. A group of fast boats approaching a destroyer may last only a few minutes. The strategic system behind that moment has been developing for decades.